The first video in this series examined Bantu City Diaries' attempt to conduct an IQ study on the streets of Lagos, which, in summary, consisted of 30 participants, a 50p incentive, no expertise or validated test instrument, no controlled environment, and a sample drawn almost exclusively from the most economically marginalized people the creator could find on a busy afternoon. The conclusion was predictable. The video was not a study, it was a performance produced to farm engagement from an audience that was eager to accept its findings and never going to ask whether the methodology held water. Bravo. If you want to hear my thorough dismantling of this unqualified propaganda, I invite you to search for my first Debunking the Lies video. This video examines the creator's follow-up video titled "Why Do Other Races Find Black People Least Attractive?" and released under a thumbnail bearing the even less ambiguous heading "Why All Races Find Black People Ugly." The shift in subject matter is superficial because the underlying structure is the same. He makes a sweeping negative claim about black people presented without citation, dressed in the language of objectivity, and presents findings at his anti-black audience, who are already disposed to believe and circulate it. What makes this second video even more egregious than the other is that the evidence contradicting Bantu City Diaries' central claim is not buried in academic journals or dependent on specialist knowledge. A neutral and cursory search of the published literature returns results that directly contradict his opening proposition within seconds. The video's claims do not merely lack support and rigor as per usual. In several cases, the available published data runs in precisely the opposite direction. This means he is now resorting to deliberate lies and fabrications.
In the eyes of other races, black people are often considered less attractive compared to white people. When a black person dates outside their race, they tend to choose a white partner in about 70% of cases. East Asians find black people the least attractive, followed by Indians and South Asians, then Southeast Asians before Westerners.
The video's central proposition is stated without qualification in its opening lines. Regardless of whether someone is white, Hispanic, Latino, Arab, South Asian, Indian, Eurasian, or East Asian, black people are considered the least attractive. No citation is offered, no study is named, no methodology is described. The claim is simply asserted as though its scale and universality are self-evident. A neutral search of the academic literature using the search term attractiveness by ethnicity study, chosen specifically to avoid any directional bias, returns a different picture entirely. The first relevant summary states plainly that black men are frequently rated as the most attractive in several large-scale studies. This is not a marginal or contested finding. It is the first result returned by an objective, unguided search of the published evidence. One peer-reviewed study, published in a recognized academic journal by researcher Michael Lewis in 2011, investigated perceived attractiveness across 600 black, white, and mixed-race faces rated by white participants. Its finding was unambiguous. Attractiveness was greater for black male faces than white male faces. This study is not unusual. It is representative of a consistent pattern in the literature in which black male attractiveness is rated highly across multiple research contexts and participant groups. BCD's video does not engage with any of this research. It does not attempt to refute it, contextualize it, or explain why his conclusions diverge from it. He simply proceeds as though the literature does not exist, stating as universal fact something that the published evidence consistently contradicts.
In this video, I aim to explore why East Asians and Asia as a whole tend to view black people as the least attractive.
Having asserted that all races find black people unattractive, BCD narrows his focus almost entirely to East Asian populations, particularly Korean, Japanese, and Chinese communities. This narrowing is itself revealing. The video is titled as a universal claim. its actual content rests almost entirely on a single demographic region. The reason is not difficult to identify. East Asia is the one area where the interracial dating and marriage data can most plausibly be framed, with sufficient selective reading to suggest a preference against black partners. Even here, however, the framing is deeply misleading. The interracial marriage data from both the United Kingdom and the United States shows that East Asian women, particularly Chinese women, marry white men at remarkably high rates. Approximately 23 to 24% of Chinese women in the UK and around 17 to 20% in the United States. BCD treats this as evidence that East Asians find black people unattractive. What it actually demonstrates is something categorically different, that East Asian communities, particularly women, exhibit a pronounced preference for white partners specifically. The contrast that matters in this data is not between black and everyone else. It is between white and everyone else. East Asian communities also marry South Asian and Hispanic partners at very low rates. BCD does not mention this because his argument requires the gap to be framed as anti-black sentiment rather than pro-white preference. The distinction is not semantic. Anti-black sentiment and pro-white preference have different causes, different histories, and different implications. The available evidence points clearly toward the latter. East Asian cultures, particularly in China, Japan, and Korea, have documented histories of internal hierarchies built around skin lightness as a proxy for class and social status. Traditions that date back to at least the 17th century, with no evidence of being fueled by anti-black sentiment. The self-perpetuating nature of this preference is visible in contemporary popular culture. K-pop performers routinely dye their hair blonde, wear whitening makeup, and present an aesthetic built almost entirely around approximating a Western European appearance. This is a culture processing its own relationship with whiteness, not a culture issuing a verdict on black attractiveness. The population size argument is equally important and equally ignored by BCD. Data showing that a higher percentage of black men marry white women than vice versa. The explanation is purely arithmetical. Black people constitute approximately 3% of the UK population. Even if every black person in the country entered an interracial relationship with a white partner, the effect on the white population's interracial marriage statistics would be minimal, simply because the pool of black partners is so small relative to the total white population. The percentage asymmetry reflects population ratios, not preference ratios. This is elementary demographic reasoning, and BCD has chosen not to apply it.
Is it racism? Are we considered unattractive? Or do we have a reputation for being poor parents or people? Answer lies somewhere within these many questions. In Chinese, Korean, and to some extent Japanese cultures, relationships and marriages are heavily influenced by Confucian's tradition. The marriages are viewed as unions between two families with a strong emphasis on family-oriented values. Additional expectations may include having a stable career, being debt-free, and coming from a reputable family. These qualities are not typical of black Africans or even black Westerners. Profanity, public nudity, and high body count are generally not accepted, as well as casual sexual behavior.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
In an attempt to provide a cultural rather than purely racial explanation for East Asian dating preferences, BCD invokes Confucian values, the emphasis on family commitment, financial stability, traditional gender roles, and respect for in-laws. His argument is that black people, both African and Western, do not embody these values, and that this cultural incompatibility accounts for East Asian reluctance to enter relationships with black partners. This argument fails on its own terms within minutes of being made. African marriage traditions, particularly across his target demographic of West African cultures, are among the most family-centered and structurally formal in the world. The engagement ceremony in many African traditions carries more social and familial weight than the wedding itself. The dowry system, the formal introduction of families, The expectation that a man demonstrate financial readiness before marriage is sanctioned. These are foundational to the way marriage is understood and practiced across a vast majority of African societies. BCD describes these Confucian values as qualities that black people lack, while showing footage of what appears to be a traditional Nigerian wedding ceremony in the background. The contradiction is as laughable as his claims are cynical. There is no possible way that he is not aware that he is peddling complete and utter lies at this point.
It must be asked, white people don't necessarily tick the Confucian box. So why are they open to dating white people but not blacks? Easy, their skin is pale and their countries were role models for East Asian countries. East Asians admire white people since they were poor and continue to view them positively today.
Come on now, dawg. Come on, man.
More fundamentally, the Confucian values argument collapses the moment BCD acknowledges, which he does briefly, that East Asian communities show no particular preference for white Western partners on the basis of shared Confucian values. Western cultures are not more Confucian than African ones. If anything, the opposite is true. Extended family involvement in marriage decisions, the social stigma of remaining unmarried, the expectation of children within marriage, and the subordinate relationship between a spouse and in-laws are features far more characteristic of African family structures than of contemporary white Western ones. BCD's own evidence therefore demonstrates that the preference for white partners has nothing to do with Confucian compatibility. His response when he reaches this logical dead end is to say that the preference comes down to skin color. He has, in other words, spent several minutes constructing an elaborate cultural argument that he then abandons in favor of the same circular premise with which he began.
Oh, brother, this guy stinks!
The most straightforwardly dishonest section of the video concerns family structure and sexual behavior. BCD presents the following claims without citation.
On average, a 20-year-old African woman has had 8 sexual partners, while an Asian woman of the same age has had about 3. In contrast, the percentage of single-parent household is notably low in countries like India at 5%, Korea 6.5%, and Japan 12%. In comparison, Botswana has a staggering 65%, South Africa 60%, Kenya 27%, and both the DR Congo and Zimbabwe around 25% each.
According to BCD, these figures demonstrate the cultural incompatibility of black African populations with the values that East Asian and white communities prize. However, none of these figures are supported by available data, and the published studies with figures once again directly contradict his claims. In contrast, the Pew Research Center's 2019 study on single-parent household rates, one of the most comprehensive cross-national assessments available, identifies the United States as the country with the highest rate of children living in single-parent households in the world at 23%. The United Kingdom follows at 21%. Russia sits at 18%. France at 16%. By contrast, the data for black African nations, including Nigeria, rates comparable to East Asian nations and dramatically lower than the Western countries BCD implicitly positions as models of family stability. A secondary study examining single-parent rates by country places Kenya at 12% and Rwanda at 11%, higher than some nations but nowhere near the figures BCD claims. Nigeria, the very country this creator comes from and has built a channel around denigrating, appears near the bottom of the table at approximately 3%. The claim about African women averaging 8 sexual partners by the age of 20 appears to have no basis in any published study. In typical form, he provides no source or study name, no institution or date, essentially no methodology or means to elicit a citation. The figure appears on a graphic watermarked Bantu page, which is BCD's own channel. He is in effect citing himself. When actual data on sexual partner counts across populations is consulted, it does not support the picture BCD paints. The highest counts in international datasets tend to cluster in Western nations. The available data on Black African populations shows much higher fertility rates within marriage rather than high rates of non-marital sexual activity. African women marry relatively young, begin having children quickly, and continue having children throughout their fertile years, because the cultural stigma in many African societies attaches not to being unmarried, but to being married without children. This is the explanation for any elevated single mother figures in the data. Not promiscuity, but the combination of early marriage, high fertility, and the reality that it is not uncommon for partners to die with at least one child below the age of 17 in regions with higher mortality rates. The study says this explicitly. BCD either has not read it or has chosen to ignore it. BCD's argument treats the question of Black attractiveness as though it operates in a vacuum. He acts as though the obvious and irrefutable cultural and aesthetic influence of Black communities on the rest of the world is simply not available as evidence. This is an extraordinary omission of convenience. The physical aesthetic that dominates the global beauty industry at present, such as fuller lips, high pronounced cheekbones, muscular toned shoulders and arms, larger curvaceous thighs, a more pronounced posterior and darker skin tones achieved through tanning, is the aesthetic that most naturally characterizes Black women. This is not a contested observation. The cosmetic surgery market in Western countries has for years been driven substantially by procedures designed to approximate features that are naturally more common among women of African descent. The gym culture that has reshaped Western standards of female beauty over the past 2 decades is, in its idealized form, built around a physique that Black women are much more likely to possess naturally without training. For Black men, the pattern is equally clear. Similar to the Black female, the Black male physique, broad shoulders, high muscle percentage, lower visible fat, is idealized in gym environments and bodybuilding communities. In addition to this, the influence of Black men is disproportionately favorable when compared with population sizes and global economic strength. For example, multicultural London English, the dominant dialect of British youth across all ethnic groups, is Black English, developed by Black British communities over decades and subsequently adopted wholesale by Arab, Indian, white, and every other demographic of young Britain. Hip-hop, the single most commercially dominant music genre in the world for the past 3 decades, is a Black American art form. The fashion, language, and cultural signifiers that define youth culture globally, from Tokyo to Seoul to Lagos to London, are overwhelmingly derived from Black cultural production. BCD's claim that Black people are universally considered the least attractive runs directly against this pattern of evidence. A population whose cultural output is being actively copied, whose aesthetic standards are being physically, often artificially, pursued through surgery and exercise, and whose men are consistently rated as highly attractive in peer-reviewed studies, is not a population that other cultures find repellent, repulsive, or ugly. It is a population whose cultural and physical characteristics other groups are working to acquire in preference of their own, and by proxy of this behavior are attracted to. A thread that runs through both the IQ video and this one is BCD's consistent refusal to provide citations for his factual claims. The single parent statistics come from a graphic bearing his own channel's watermark. The claim that East Asians find Black people the least attractive is stated without any named study. The figure of 8 sexual partners for the average 20-year-old African woman has no source at all. The claim that Black people are universally seen as the least attractive is simply asserted in the opening sentence. Providing citations shouldn't be viewed as an optional, bureaucratic formality in academic or journalistic work. It is the mechanism by which claims can be verified, challenged, and corrected. Without citation, there is no way to determine whether a statistic is real, whether it has been accurately reported, whether the methodology of the study it came from was sound, or whether the conclusions drawn from it are warranted. A creator who makes factual claims without citations is asking his audience to accept those claims on the basis of his personal authority alone. BCD's personal authority, as the previous article established, rests on a channel whose entire catalogue moves in one direction, towards the conclusion that black people are inferior. His track record offers no grounds for trust. And when citations are provided, as in this case by researchers who consulted the actual literature, they consistently contradict what he has said. What the attractiveness video adds compared to the IQ video is an additional layer of incoherence. In the IQ video, the methodology was flawed, but at least the flaws were internal. A bad sample, a bad incentive structure, a bad test instrument. In the attractiveness video, BCD is not even consistent with himself. He argues that black people are culturally incompatible with Confucian values, then acknowledges that white people are also culturally incompatible with Confucian values, then concludes that it is about skin color after all, but then argues the dislike of skin color has nothing to do with racism. He argues that black women are promiscuous and culturally deficient. Then the data he has not cited turns out to show that multiple African populations, including the one that he belongs to, have some of the lowest single-parent household rates in the world. He argues that East Asians find black people specifically unattractive, whereas the data shows that they marry white people at extraordinary rates whilst barely marrying anyone else outside their own group besides them. A creator arguing in good faith, confronted with this kind of repeated self-contradiction, would revise his conclusions. However, BCD is clearly on a mission. The contradictions do not matter because the purpose of the video is not to be rigorous or to arrive at the truth. The purpose is to farm engagement by generating a sequence of negative statements about black people that his audience can absorb, share, and cite in other contexts. The internal logic is irrelevant. The emotional function is not. That function is the same as it was in the IQ video, to provide a black face for conclusions that a white face would have struggled to circulate as freely. The claims aren't novel. The ideas are not original. The only thing BCD contributes is his ethnic identity, which launders the content for an audience that needs the cover. The evidence, however, does not change based on who is presenting it. BCD's claims about black attractiveness just aren't supported by the published literature. Several of his specific statistics appear to be fabricated. His cultural arguments contradict themselves. And the broader picture of black cultural and aesthetic influence on the rest of the world runs directly counter to the thesis he is trying to establish. What the evidence shows defeats his claims. But I have a feeling being proven wrong won't stop BCD from using the exact same methodology to promote his next unsupported grift. But rest assured, when he does crawl out from beneath his rock to fabricate another diatribe of negative propaganda, I'll still be here to refute it.